What the hell is going on? Allison's voice cracked, her grip tightening on the cold metal bed rail. Sweat clung to her forehead. Her vision blurred with exhaustion, but her ears were sharp. She could hear the doctors murmuring, words she couldn't quite make out, but the tone chilled her to the bone. The first twin's out, healthy, breathing well, the obstetrician said loudly, but his eyes betrayed confusion. Let's get him cleaned and swaddled. A nurse stepped forward, holding a small baby in her arms. He was beautiful. Dark brown skin, soft curls coiled against his head like waves of velvet, and full lips that puckered as he let out his first fierce cry. Allison's breath caught in her throat. He looks just like you, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes as she looked at her husband. Errol, standing by her side, grinned with pride. That's my boy. But the relief was short-lived. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. No second cry. The room's energy shifted. What had been a whirlwind of activity now turned into something eerily still. A nurse glanced at the monitor. The heart rate was steady, but there was no sign of the second twin making his way into the world. Allison screamed again. Her body convulsed with another contraction. And then, the silence shattered. A wet, sharp gasp. A cry, weak at first, then louder. But it wasn't the sound that stunned the room. It was the baby. Bring him to me, Allison panted, reaching forward. No one moved. The nurses exchanged glances. The doctor hesitated. Is something wrong? Errol demanded, stepping forward. The nurse finally brought the baby over, her face a mask of professional calm that cracked around the edges. Wrapped in the same soft hospital blanket as his brother, the second twin looked like he belonged to a different family. Pale white skin. Blonde ringlets. Light green eyes fluttering open. Allison stared. Errol's smile dropped. I don't understand, Allison whispered. This can't be right. DNA doesn't lie, the doctor said gently, sensing their disbelief. They're both yours. Fraternal twins. One egg each, two different genetic expressions. Errol was speechless. He looked at the baby in his wife's arms, fair-skinned, almost translucent in the fluorescent lights, and then back at the other twin now sleeping in a bassinet, a mirror of himself. Two sons. One black. One white. Same mother. Same father. Same night. The story made headlines in their local paper within weeks. Born different, the black and white twins of East London. Some neighbors cooed over the miracle of genetics. Others whispered behind their backs. Some asked outright if Allison had cheated. Others made jokes that stung for years. But what no one saw, what even the cameras and curious strangers didn't understand, was what that night had set in motion. Because from the very beginning, James and Daniel were not just brothers. Not just twins. They were proof. Proof that biology could defy expectations. Proof that race, like identity, was not always something visible or easily labeled. But they were also targets. Of stares. Of questions. Of cruel assumptions. And as they grew, the world didn't get kinder. It got sharper. And it demanded answers the boys couldn't give. Not yet. 20 minutes after birth, James was sleeping soundly, dark lashes resting on dark skin, curled in his mother's arms. 21 minutes later, Daniel blinked into the same world, squinting against the light, white as snow, hair like spun gold. They were born into the same home, the same arms, but they would not live the same childhood. And neither of them had any idea just how much that difference would cost. Errol couldn't sleep that night. He sat in the hard plastic chair by Allison's bedside, staring through the glass at the two bassinets in the nursery. Two newborns lay side by side under the soft blue glow of the warming lamps. To the nurses walking by, they probably looked like two babies from different families. To Errol it felt like a test. He loved them both. Of course he did. But already he saw what was coming. People are gonna talk, he muttered under his breath. Allison stirred. They already are. She didn't sound bitter. Just tired. And perhaps, prepared. We'll get questions, she added. Stares. Whispers. I can handle stares. Errol rubbed his eyes. But what about them? Allison didn't answer. Because she didn't know. The hospital discharged them with polite congratulations and side glances. The birth certificate clerk asked twice if the boys had the same father. One nurse leaned in and said, "Is it really possible?" The world already wanted explanations. James cried often, clinging to Allison's chest, soothed only by her voice or Errol's humming. Daniel was quieter, more observant, his pale green eyes scanning the world as though trying to figure out why he'd arrived in the wrong body. Allison nicknamed them Fire and Ice. Two forces born under the same roof. They didn't sleep at the same time. They didn't like the same formula. And by the time they were toddlers, they had distinct personalities. James ran headlong into everything: furniture, dogs, people. Daniel sat back and watched it all happen. One loved to dance to reggae, the other to Mozart. One was loud, the other but the questions never stopped. At the park, are they adopted? Did you use IVF? Are they from the same dad? At the doctor's office, I think there's been a mix-up with the charts. This one's listed as black? Even teachers stumbled. One substitute called Daniel the neighbor's kid. Another one's asked James if his real brother would be picked up too. It was never-ending. Yet inside their home, Allison and Errol tried to make it normal. Love doesn't ask for skin color, Allison often said. But outside? Outside had rules. Outside had boxes. And neither of their boys fit neatly into any. At their third birthday, a photographer came to take family portraits. "Stand the boys next to each other," she said. They did. And the woman frowned. "Would it be all right if we took a few with just one at a time?" Allison forced a smile. "No, thank you." Later that night, she burned the photographer's business card. She was done explaining. Done apologizing. They were twins. They were brothers. They were hers. And if the world couldn't understand that, then maybe it was time the world learned. The twins started preschool at age 3. By then, Allison had grown used to the stares. The questions. The polite confusion that never seemed to leave people's faces when they saw James and Daniel together. But school was different. School had structure, categories, rules, and not much room for the unexplainable. Daniel loved drawing. On the first day, he picked up a brown crayon, looked at it, then glanced at James. James was scribbling excitedly in shades of chocolate, copper, and gold. Daniel hesitated. He looked at his own hand, then reached for the peach crayon instead. Later, a teacher crouched beside him. "Sweetheart, when you draw yourself, it's important to be accurate, okay?" Daniel blinked at her. "I am." "No, darling," the teacher said gently, "you're mixed. You should use brown." "But I'm white," Daniel replied. "Like Mum." The teacher smiled tightly and walked away. The next day, she told Allison, he needs to understand his identity. Allison's mouth went dry. He's 3. He's biracial. He needs to be taught to accept both sides. "I'm sorry," Allison said, holding Daniel's hand tighter, "but if my son looks in the mirror and sees a white boy, who are you to tell him he's wrong?" The conversation escalated. Another staff member was called in. Allison refused to back down. By the end of the week, she pulled both boys out. "They won't tell my child who he is," she told Errol. "Good," he said. "We'll find someplace else." By primary school, the twins had started noticing things. James saw it first. When he raised his hand in class, the teacher often picked someone else. When he forgot his homework, it was a serious issue. When Daniel forgot his, it was just a mistake. He didn't complain. He just watched. Daniel, on the other hand, didn't see it at first. Not until year 5, when a new student asked him who the black boy next to him was. "That's my twin," Daniel said proudly. The boy laughed. "He's black. You're not. Nice try." Word spread. By the next week, kids whispered in hallways. Some mocked James, "He ain't your real brother." Others taunted Daniel, "Fake black kid." One boy called him a traitor. Daniel didn't understand. "A traitor to what?" he asked. "To your race," the boy said. Daniel went home bruised that day. His lip was split. His shirt torn. When Allison asked what happened, he lied and said he fell. James knew better. He saw it all. The next time it happened, he didn't wait. A punch. A push. A flurry of fists. The teacher pulled James off, furious. You don't solve problems with violence. No, James said quietly, but I won't let him hurt my brother again. They were separated into different classes after that. Administrators said it was for focus and individual growth. But the truth? People couldn't handle the contradiction. A black boy and a white boy claiming to be twins? It made things complicated. They didn't want complicated. They wanted boxes. One student per label. At home, Allison tried to keep them grounded. She read them stories about twin tigers, about sibling astronauts. She told them every day, you're both perfect. You're both loved. But outside, reality pressed in. At the grocery store, are they friends? At the dentist, did you adopt one? Even at church, someone once whispered during communion, which one's really hers? Daniel started to withdraw. He no longer volunteered to read in class. He stopped inviting friends over. His drawings turned pale and blank. No figures, no people, just quiet houses and distant trees. James, in contrast, grew louder. He laughed harder, made more friends, joined the football team. But Allison could see it was armor. He was building walls. Because inside, he was starting to ask himself, would he ever be accepted the same way Daniel was? One evening after dinner, James turned to Daniel. Do you wish we weren't twins? He asked. Daniel blinked. What? No. James stared at his hands. Sometimes people look at me like I'm the mistake. Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I think you're the only thing that proves I'm real. What do you mean? Daniel shrugged. If you didn't exist, people might just see me as white. They'd never know the rest. You could pass, James said bitterly. I don't want to. They didn't talk much more after that. But something had shifted. They were beginning to understand the world would keep trying to pull them apart. So maybe they needed to start pulling back. Together. It started with a rumor. No one knew where it came from. No one admitted to spreading it. But suddenly, it was everywhere. Daniel Kelly's not white, someone said in the hallway. He's half black, said another. No way, one kid laughed. He's whiter than I am. He's got a black twin, a girl whispered. Same birthday, same parents. You're joking. Look it up. By lunchtime, it wasn't just a rumor. It was a verdict. A sentence passed in silence, in looks, in jokes traded across tables when Daniel walked by. He felt it before he understood it. The pause in conversations. The laughter that stopped as he entered the room. The way kids leaned in and whispered, just out of reach. Then came the first name. Hey, Oreo. Daniel turned, confused. What? You heard me, race faker. He didn't reply. He couldn't. He just stared wide-eyed as the insult sank in. It was only the beginning. The school had never asked questions when Daniel filled out forms as white. He didn't know what else to check. The boxes were simple. White, black, Asian. Which am I? He once asked Allison. Whatever you feel you are, she said. But people tell me I'm not white. They don't get to decide, she replied. Now, it felt like everyone was deciding for him. James watched it unfold from the other end of the school. By then, the teachers had separated them into different sections, different friends, different worlds. But the rumors reached him too. Your twin thinks he's white? One kid said to James. He is white, James shot back. No, he's not. He's mixed. James narrowed his eyes. So am I. The other kid blinked. Well, yeah, but you look like it. Daniel came home one afternoon with his backpack slashed open. He said he tripped on the sidewalk. Allison didn't believe him. Neither did James. Who did it? James asked quietly that night, as they lay in their beds, a thin wall between their rooms. I don't want to talk about it, Daniel replied. James didn't push. But he didn't sleep either. The bullying escalated. Some days it was whispers and slurs. Other days it was fists. You think you're better than us? A boy spat. Acting like you're white. But I am, Daniel said. The boy shoved him against the lockers. No, you're not. You're a liar. James saw the bruises. He saw the silence. And he couldn't take it anymore. One afternoon, James found Daniel cornered in the back courtyard. Two older boys were laughing. One held Daniel by the collar. The other filmed on his phone. James didn't speak. He didn't shout. He just ran. His body hit the first boy like a freight train, knocking him sideways. The phone clattered to the ground. The second boy swung wildly and missed. James didn't miss. When a teacher pulled them apart, James's lip was bleeding. His knuckles bruised. Daniel stood frozen, back pressed to the wall, still shaking. They both got detention. James didn't care. He sat in the principal's office with his arms crossed, silent. Allison was called. When she arrived, she listened to the report, nodded once, then asked, "And what happened to the boys who cornered my son?" The principal hesitated. "We're still looking into that." "Let me save you time," she said. "They've done this before. And you've ignored it." Errol stood in the hallway behind her, arms folded. He didn't say a word. But his presence spoke volumes. At home that night, Allison sat both boys down. "This stops now," she said. "I don't want to go back," Daniel whispered. "I know," she said gently. "But you have to finish this term. After that, we'll look at options." "What's the point?" Daniel said. "No matter where I go, they'll still see me the same." James looked at him. "Maybe," he said. "But you're not alone." The next week, the school counselor called James in. "You're a good student," she said. "But you're becoming disruptive." James stared at her. "For defending my brother?" She hesitated. "It's complicated." "No," James said. "It's not." A month later, Daniel transferred to a different school. A more diverse place, where kids had names like Malik and Priya and Jose. Where no one questioned his box on a form. Where no one cared that he had a black twin. Where no one called him a fake. It wasn't perfect. But it was better. And sometimes, better was enough. James stayed behind. He had a scholarship to keep. Friends he trusted. Teachers who finally saw him. But most of all, he stayed to prove a point. You didn't always have to run. Sometimes you could plant your feet. Even in soil that didn't want you. Even when it cracked beneath you. On the day Daniel left, James stood at the front door in his school uniform. They didn't hug. They didn't say much. But just before Daniel walked out, he turned back. "If anyone calls you Oreo," he said, "punch them in the face." James smiled. "Deal." At 11 years old, James cried during a movie. It was some old animated film his little sister Katie had picked. Something with talking animals and a sad goodbye near the end. As the credits rolled, tears slid down his cheeks. Quiet, almost hidden. But Errol saw. "Wipe your face," his father said. "You don't want people thinking you're soft." Allison shot him a look, but said nothing. James wiped his face. It wasn't the first time he heard that word. So it echoed through locker rooms and classrooms. At football practice. At the barber shop. It wasn't about tears, not really. It was about something deeper. A weight carried by black boys from the moment they showed emotion. Because if you cried, if you hesitated, if you spoke gently, then you weren't strong. You weren't tough. You weren't safe. You were vulnerable. And vulnerability, for a boy like James, was dangerous. He learned the rules early. Don't talk too much about your feelings. Don't raise your voice in class. Don't run in stores. Don't wear your hoodie up indoors. Smile but not too wide. Laugh but not too loud. And above all, never, ever let them see you break. In year 8, a teacher accused him of cheating. The exam was a writing assessment. James had spent weeks preparing. Allison had reviewed every outline, every draft. She knew the essay was his. But the teacher didn't believe it. "It's too advanced for a student at his level," she said. "We'll have to invalidate the score." Errol showed up to the meeting in a suit. He brought James's notebook, full of messy handwriting and half-sketched paragraphs. He handed it across the table without a word. The teacher flipped through it, face paling. We didn't realize he'd been working on this long." "You didn't want to realize," Errol said. James sat silently through the entire thing. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He clenched his jaw and learned something new. Even excellence would be doubted if it came from the wrong skin. By 14, James had built walls inside himself. He smiled often, joked with classmates, charmed teachers. But he never let them in. Not really. Except Daniel. Sometimes. They didn't talk much during the school week. Different buses. Different uniforms. Different circles. But on Saturdays, they met at the park behind their old primary school. Daniel would bring a football. James would bring music. They'd kick around for a bit, share updates, maybe argue over who was better at math. One Saturday, Daniel asked, "Do you ever wish you looked like me?" James didn't answer right away. "I don't know," he finally said. "Would have made things easier, maybe. But not better?" James thought about that. "I like looking like Dad," he said. "I just wish people didn't hate it." At school, James joined the debate team. He liked the structure, the rules, the way arguments were judged on points instead of skin. But even there, he felt the weight. During one regional match, a student from another school walked up to him before it began. "You're the only black kid here," the boy said. James nodded. "And? I just mean, don't feel weird if people underestimate you." James smiled, tight-lipped. "They already do. I'm used to it." He won the debate that day. But no one congratulated him first. They went to his white teammate. James laughed, shook hands, went home, and sat in the dark for an hour. Errol noticed the silence. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "You sure?" James hesitated. Then, "If I said no, would it matter?" Errol exhaled. "It would matter to me." James didn't reply. Because he wasn't sure that was true. One night, Allison found James in the kitchen, still awake at 2 a.m. He was sitting at the table, notebook open, eyes red. She said nothing. Just poured him a glass of warm milk and slid it across the table. James looked up. "I'm tired." "I know. They think I'm a threat. And a joke. At the same time." Allison reached out, placed her hand over his. "You are neither," she said. "But if the world can't see it, then we keep reminding them. Every day." The next week, James auditioned for the cheer team. He didn't tell anyone. Not Daniel. Not Errol. Not even Allison. He just walked into the gym, filled out the form, and showed them what he could do. By the end of the tryouts, 3 girls were whispering to each other. "He's actually good. Way better than last year's captain. He's strong. But graceful too." James stood at the center of the gym, chest rising and falling. He had never felt more vulnerable. But also, never more seen. He made the team. Some classmates teased him. Others were supportive. But James didn't care. Because for the first time, he chose to do something just for himself. Not to prove he was smart, or safe, or strong, but because he loved it. And that mattered more than approval. At dinner that night, he finally told the family. Errol raised an eyebrow. "A cheerleader?" "Yeah." The pause. Then Errol nodded. "Good. Be the best one they've ever seen." James smiled. Daniel just grinned and said, "Guess I'm not the only one who likes flipping through the air." Being black meant James had to fight to be seen as more than a stereotype. Being a twin meant he had to fight to be seen as whole without comparison. Being soft? It wasn't weakness. It was survival. And now it was his strength. Daniel didn't want to fight. He hated conflict. Even when kids called him half-breed or ghost brother, he'd keep walking. Head down. Hands stuffed into his pockets. That was his method, disappear. But some days, disappearing wasn't enough. The back wall of Brookwell Secondary was where fights happened. Everyone knew that. No teachers patrolled there. No cameras. Just gravel, graffiti, and boys trying to prove something. Daniel ended up there by accident. At least, that's what he told himself. It started in the cafeteria. A tall boy with pale skin and a shaved head, Marcus, knocked Daniel's tray to the floor. "You eat like a black kid too, huh?" Laughter erupted around the table. Daniel's throat tightened. "Leave me alone." "Oh, the Oreo speaks." Daniel tried to walk away, but Marcus followed, mimicking his walk. "You might trip on your identity." Daniel clenched his fists but didn't swing. "Not there. Not yet. Word spread fast. By the next break, Daniel found a note in his locker. 3:15, back wall. Be there. He crumpled it up and threw it away. But at 3:12 he was already walking there. The crowd had gathered. Phones out. Smirks ready. Bloodlust hiding behind hoodies. Marcus was waiting, arms folded. Daniel stepped into the half-circle. I don't want to fight, he said, voice calm. Marcus cracked his knuckles. Then you shouldn't have been born a lie. Daniel saw red. He didn't remember throwing the first punch. Only the sound it made. Skin on jaw. The dull crack. The shock in Marcus's eyes. Then chaos. They grappled, fists flying. Gravel scraping knees. Sweat and spit and rage in equal measure. Marcus got in a few good hits. But Daniel? Daniel didn't stop. Not until a hand pulled him off. Enough! It was James. He pushed through the crowd like a storm, eyes blazing. Daniel stood panting, knuckles bleeding, chest heaving. James didn't say a word. He just looked at his brother. And understood everything. That night, Allison answered a call from the school. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. When the boys got home, she sat them down at the kitchen table. Daniel had an ice pack on his eye. James had dirt on his shoes. So, she said calmly, which one of you threw the first punch? Silence. Then Daniel, I did. Allison didn't raise her voice. Didn't lecture. She just said, tell me why. Daniel opened his mouth. But the words got stuck. How do you explain years of feeling like a fraud? Of being called a liar for simply existing? Of being told you're not enough, by both sides? So he didn't try. He just looked at her. And she understood. She reached across the table, placed her hand over his. I'm proud of you. Errol came home later that night. He didn't say much. Just nodded at Daniel's bandaged knuckles. Then turned to James. You were there? James nodded. You fight too? No, James said. I stopped it. Errol nodded again. Then said softly, good. The next morning, the school tried to suspend Daniel. But Allison came prepared. She had printouts of the notes Daniel had received. A list of past complaints she had submitted. Screenshots of anonymous messages sent to his phone. You've ignored all of this, she said to the principal. So no, Daniel won't be suspended. He'll be protected. Like he should have been from the beginning. The principal caved. Daniel stayed. But something had changed. He walked the halls with his chin higher. He spoke up in class. And for the first time, when people looked at him, he looked back. James, meanwhile, noticed the shift. They weren't just twins anymore. They were becoming allies. Fighters. Not with fists, but with presence. With truth. One weekend, they went to a skate park together. A white kid rolled up beside them. You guys actually twins? Yup, James said. The boy raised an eyebrow. But you're black. And he's not, Daniel added. Crazy, huh? The boy shrugged. That's cool. And skated off. They looked at each other. That's a first, James said. Daniel grinned. Maybe the world's catching up. Or maybe we're just done waiting. Back home, Allison watched them through the window. Two boys. Same laugh. Same scars. Different shades, but the same fire. She turned to Errol. They're not little boys anymore. Errol nodded. They're becoming men. And they're doing it together. They weren't close growing up. Not the way twins are supposed to be. James was all rhythm, edge, and energy. Daniel moved like a whisper, quiet, deliberate, hard to pin down. They had separate friends. Separate tastes. Separate worlds. But fists had a strange way of sealing bonds. And bruises remembered who stood beside you. After the fight behind the school, something shifted, not loud or dramatic, but real. They started texting more. Simple things at first. You see that new movie? Heard Mum made curry. Bring my hoodie if you're home before me. Then longer threads. Conversations about music, teachers, racism. About how weird it felt to be 17 and still not know where you belonged. One night, Daniel sent James a text that read, You ever feel like we're each other's mirrors? James stared at it for a while. Then back. No. More like armor. That summer, they worked at the same grocery store, different departments, but the same name tag, Kelly. Customers would glance from one to the other, frown and ask, "Are you guys related?" Sometimes James would say, "Nah, just a coincidence." Daniel would grin. "We share a birthday though." Other times they told the truth. "We're twins." The reactions never disappointed. A dropped jaw. A laugh. A confused blink. Twins? But how? James would shrug. "Biology's weird." "Daniel, people are weirder." They never got tired of saying it, because every time it reminded them they weren't the problem. Perception was. One afternoon, a customer followed James to the back room. She was older, white, polite in the way people are when they're suspicious but trying to smile through it. "Excuse me, young man," she said, "but I overheard you tell someone you're related to the boy out front?" "Yeah," James said. "He's my brother." She tilted her head. "You don't look alike." James leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Yeah, we get that a lot." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you ever feel misplaced?" James stared at her. Then he said, "Not when I'm with him." Daniel noticed the change in James, too. He wasn't just loud anymore, he was purposeful. He spoke up in staff meetings. He called out customers for microaggressions. He refused to laugh at jokes meant to humiliate others. He carried himself like a man who'd stopped apologizing. Daniel admired that. But he also saw something behind the bravado. Exhaustion. The kind you carry when you're always explaining who you are. One night, after a long shift, they sat on the hood of Errol's old car in the driveway. It was quiet. Just the hum of distant traffic and the occasional dog bark. Daniel turned to James. "Do you think we'll ever stop having to prove it?" "Prove what?" "That we belong." James didn't answer right away. Then, "Maybe not to the world, but to ourselves? I think we already have." Later that week, they were invited to speak at a community event. Allison had sent in their story to a local youth group, how they were twins, how they'd faced discrimination from both sides, how they stood by each other. The invitation came with one request. Speak from the heart. Just tell your truth. They weren't sure at first. James hated stages. Daniel hated microphones. But something about it felt. They stood on a small platform in front of 50 folding chairs. A mix of kids and parents. Mostly black. Some white. Some in between. James spoke first. "My name's James. I'm black. I'm gay. And I'm a twin." The room went silent. Daniel followed. "I'm Daniel. I'm white. I'm straight. And I'm also a twin." Someone in the back chuckled. James smiled. "Yeah, we get that reaction a lot." They told their story. Of the hospital. The school fights. The stairs. The boxes they never fit in. They didn't preach. They didn't teach. They just told the truth. At the end, James said, "We don't match. But we matter." And Daniel added, "You don't have to look like someone to stand beside them." The crowd stood. Clapped. Some cried. And for the first time, the twins didn't feel like anomalies. They felt like examples. Afterward, a boy about 10 years old approached them. He was biracial. Hair in tight curls. Freckles across his nose. He looked at James, then Daniel. "Are you really twins?" James nodded. The boy smiled. "Cool." And that was it. No confusion. No disbelief. Just a kid seeing himself in someone else. In the car on the way home, Allison gripped the steering wheel with both hands. "I'm proud of you too." Neither of them responded right away. But they both leaned forward, smiling. In different voices. In perfect unison. "Thanks, Mum." James knew by the time he was 15. Not because of some dramatic realization or a conversation with anyone in particular. It was quieter than that. It was the way he felt around Lewis, his lab partner in biology, when their hands accidentally brushed. The heat in his face. The way his chest tightened when Lewis smiled. It was in the music he listened to. The lyrics that felt personal. The glances he gave other boys, and the shame that sometimes followed. He didn't tell anyone. Not even Daniel. Especially not Daniel. At 16, he thought about telling his parents. He rehearsed it in his head, how to say it, when to say it, what words might soften the blow. But something always stopped him. His dad. Errol wasn't cruel. He wasn't hateful. But he was traditional. Football. Strength. Manhood. There was a way a man should be. James didn't always fit that mold, and this felt like the final break. So he buried it. Wrapped it tight under layers of jokes and charm. He dated girls. Briefly. Half-heartedly. He laughed when his teammates talked about girls' bodies. He nodded along. But it always felt like pretending. And pretending was exhausting. The only place he felt free was at cheer practice. There, he didn't have to perform masculinity. He could be expressive. Bold. Precise. He could lift, flip, and catch with power and grace. And no one questioned him. At least not out loud. At 17, something changed. Lewis came out. Openly. Publicly. Fearlessly. He stood in the middle of the cafeteria with his boyfriend and kissed him. Just once. It was quick, awkward, and brave as hell. James watched from across the room. And felt something shift inside him. That night he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "You okay?" James hesitated. Then typed, "I think I need to tell you something." They met the next day at their usual spot, behind the skate park, under the overpass where nobody listened, and nothing echoed too far. James paced. Daniel waited. Finally, James said it. "I'm gay." Daniel blinked. "Okay." James stopped. "That's it?" Daniel shrugged. "Yeah. I kinda figured." James stared at him. "How? You never looked at girls the way I do." James laughed, shaky, relieved. "So you're not weirded out?" "Dude," Daniel said, stepping forward, "if anyone messes with you about it, they're messing with both of us." The pause. Then James whispered, "Thanks." Daniel clapped him on the back. "Took you long enough." Telling their parents was harder. Allison cried. Not because she was upset, because she was scared. "I just don't want the world to hurt you," she said. "I know how cruel it can be." James held her hand. "It already tries. This doesn't change that." Errol was quiet for a long time. He sat at the table, fingers steepled, staring at nothing. Then he said, "You're still my son." James looked up. "And I still expect you to be great." Word spread at school. Some kids whispered. Others nodded in respect. Lewis gave him a subtle thumbs up across the hallway. But James didn't need validation. He had already done the hardest part. He'd stopped hiding from himself. Later that month, he joined a local LGBTQ+ youth group. Daniel came with him. "I'm not gay," Daniel told the group on day one. A few heads turned. "I'm here for my brother," he added. Someone clapped. James rolled his eyes but smiled. That night, as they walked home, James nudged him. "You didn't have to come." Daniel shrugged. "I didn't want you to be alone." Being out didn't solve everything. It didn't stop the stares. It didn't silence the slurs. But it changed James. He stood taller. Smiled wider. He didn't just exist anymore. He lived. One afternoon, he passed a group of younger students near the lockers. A boy no older than 13 stopped him. "Are you the cheer guy?" he asked. James nodded. "Yeah." "And you're gay, right?" James raised an eyebrow. "Yeah." "Why?" The boy swallowed. "Just, thanks." James smiled. Then kept walking. But inside, something bloomed. Maybe the world didn't change overnight. But sometimes, you got to be the reason someone else breathed easier. And that was enough. That night, as he lay in bed, James opened his messages. A new one from Daniel. "You're brave, man. I don't say it enough. But I'm proud of you." James typed back. "Right back at you." They weren't perfect. They still argued over music, over clothes, over whose turn it was to do dishes. But they were brothers. Twins. Enmeshed. Unbreakable. And now, finally, undeniably whole. It wasn't the stares that bothered them anymore. They'd gotten used to those. It was the need people had to explain them. To label them. To make them fit inside neat little categories that didn't exist. "You guys are twins?" "Yes." But you don't look anything alike. We know. So like, adopted? No. Half-brothers? No. Then how does that even happen? James would smile. It's called science. Daniel would shrug. Or just luck. They never gave long explanations anymore. They didn't owe anyone a biology lesson. Sometimes it was innocent curiosity. Like the woman at the bus stop who asked, "Do you both have the same blood type?" Or the nurse who double-checked their records 3 times before believing they were related. Other times, it was backhanded. At the DMV, a clerk looked at their IDs and scoffed. No way. At a party, a guy said, "You're too white to be his brother," and then laughed like it was a compliment. At church, someone once whispered, "Isn't that the gay black twin with the white brother?" They never said their names. Just labels. The world could accept a lot of things. But not contradictions. Not 2 people born from the same parents, on the same day, raised in the same home, yet representing different races, different sexualities, different lives. It confused people. And people didn't like being confused. In college application essays, James wrote about identity. Not as a crisis. As a conversation. He described growing up as a twin who always felt like an outlier, too black for white spaces, too expressive for black ones, too soft for masculinity, too bold to disappear. He wrote, "They told me I was a walking contradiction. But maybe I'm just proof that people can be more than one thing." He got into every school he applied to. Daniel wrote about the fight behind the school wall. Not to glorify it. To explain it. It wasn't just about fists, he wrote. It was about reclaiming space. About proving that I wasn't a mistake, just unexpected. He got a call back from a top technical college. They asked if he'd like to share his story on a student panel. He said yes. At the panel, a girl asked, "Do people ever accuse you of trying to be black?" Daniel paused, then said, "People accuse me of pretending not to be." The room went still. He continued, "When your skin says one thing and your blood says another, you learn quickly that truth isn't about appearance. It's about identity. And I know who I am." The more they spoke, the more they were asked to. Youth centers. School assemblies. Podcasts. People wanted to understand. And yet, so many still didn't. One interviewer asked, "Do you 2 ever wish you'd just been born the same color?" James smiled politely. Then said, "Do you ever wish you'd been born with more imagination?" The clip went viral. A week later, they were invited to appear on national morning television. Makeup. Cameras. Microphones clipped to their shirts. The host smiled too wide. "So, you 2 are twins?" "Yes." "But one of you is white and the other's black?" "Yes." "Isn't that wild?" James replied, "Not as wild as people asking us the same question since we were 3. The audience laughed. Daniel added, "We've been twins our whole lives. The world's just catching up." After the show, they sat on the curb outside the studio, their suits wrinkled, ties loosened. James pulled out his phone, already buzzing. "You think this changes anything?" Daniel asked. James leaned back against the wall. "Not the world. But maybe for someone watching." Daniel nodded. "I'd have liked to see someone like us when we were younger." "Me too." They sat in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable. Just still. Back home, Allison and Errol watched the replay. Katie clapped. "You guys looked famous." "You are famous," Allison corrected, pointing at the TV. "But not for being twins. For being yourselves." Errol crossed his arms, pride softening his face. "You showed the world who you are. And you didn't flinch." James smiled. "We learned from you." That weekend they went out for drinks, just the 2 of them. They picked a quiet bar with neon signs and worn leather booths. The bartender asked for ID, looked at both, then raised an eyebrow. "Same last name. Same birthday." James grinned. "Shocker, huh?" The bartender handed back their cards. "I've seen a lot. But this might be my favorite." They sat at the far end of the bar, drinks in hand. Daniel sipped his slowly. James scrolled through the comments on their TV segment. Thousands of views. Hundreds of messages. One caught his eye. "I thought I was broken. Watching you guys made me feel whole again." He handed the phone to Daniel. They read it in silence. Then James whispered, "We're not the only ones anymore." Daniel raised his glass. "To the ones figuring it out." James clinked his. "And to those still trying." The summer before university felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. James had chosen a liberal arts college in Brighton, diverse, progressive, full of people who embraced color and chaos. He wanted open mics, queer spaces, late-night debates in dimly lit cafes. He wanted to study sociology, gender, culture, everything the world had thrown at him since birth. Daniel, meanwhile, had taken a different path. He'd been accepted into an engineering apprenticeship just outside London. Hands-on, methodical, clean logic. Machines didn't care what box you checked. Bolts didn't ask about your identity. Equations never judged. They were going in opposite directions. And for the first time in years, it scared them. Their room at home had always been chaotic in the best way. Posters on one wall of black poets and queer icons. Schematics and tool diagrams on the other. Books about intersectionality beside manuals on circuitry. One lamp with soft rainbow hues. One with cool white LEDs. Different tastes. Same room. Same roof. Packing their things felt like unraveling a shared thread, like disassembling a language only the two of them spoke. "You sure about Brighton?" Daniel asked one night, folding a hoodie. "You sure about bolt cutters and safety goggles?" James shot back. Daniel smirked. "Fair." They paused. Then James said, "It's gonna be weird." "Yeah," Daniel nodded. "Really weird." Allison hovered nearby those last few days, pretending not to be emotional. She triple-checked packing lists, labeled bags, restocked toiletries. But her eyes betrayed her. "You boys ready?" she asked the morning James left. "No," Daniel said bluntly. "Yes," James said at the same time. They looked at each other and laughed. Allison pulled them into a long, quiet hug. Errol stood in the doorway, arms folded. He didn't say much, just, "Make us proud." But they both knew what he meant. Not make us proud because you succeed. Make us proud because you stay yourselves. The goodbye at the train station was brief, as they wanted. Too many words would have made it harder. James gave Daniel a tight, silent hug. "Don't forget to call." "Only if you do first." "You know I won't." "I know," Daniel smiled. "That's why I will." James stepped onto the train. Daniel watched until it disappeared, then walked home slower than usual. Weeks passed. They stayed in touch. Sometimes once a day. Sometimes not for days at all. But when they did talk, it was like flipping a switch. "You still crying over slam poetry? You still pretending oil changes are exciting?" They sent each other memes. Late-night rants. Voice notes full of laughter and background noise. They grew separately, but not apart. One Friday, Daniel showed up in Brighton unannounced. James opened the door in pajamas, surprised. "Thought you had work." "Called in a favor." "You hate surprises." "I don't hate you." They spent the weekend walking the coast, eating overpriced street food, talking for hours. That Sunday, as they watched waves slam against the rocks, Daniel said quietly, "I didn't think I'd miss you this much." James nodded. "Me neither." The pause. Then Daniel added, "You're doing good, you know. Like real good." "You too. Even if you drink iced coffee now like a complete poser." James shoved him. They laughed. A few months later, James came home for the holidays. He looked different. More confident. More free. He wore earrings now. Had a small tattoo on his wrist. A broken chain. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "When did that happen?" 2 weeks ago." "You tell Mum?" "Not yet." They both grinned. Dinner that night was loud and full of overlapping conversations. Katie had dyed her hair pink. Allison was experimenting with plant-based recipes. Errol kept trying to find a football match on TV that everyone could agree on. And in the middle of it all, James and Daniel sat side by side, laughing, teasing, clinking glasses. They'd taken different roads, but they were still traveling together. Later that night, they sat outside on the porch, wrapped in blankets. "Do you ever think," James said, "that we're just Two halves of one answer? Daniel thought for a moment. No. James turned. No. Daniel shrugged. I think we're two full stories. Totally different? No, Daniel smiled. Just written in different ink. As they sat in the quiet, Daniel pulled something from his pocket. A small metal plate. On it, etched in neat, blocky letters. I've got your back, always. I made it at work, he said. Figured you'd lose it less than a letter. James turned it over in his palm. Thanks. Daniel looked away, almost shy. Just in case. When you're far. James closed his fingers around it. I'm never that far. Different futures. Same blood. Different voices. Same rhythm. Whatever the world saw when it looked at them, confusion, contradiction, curiosity, they knew better. They were not anomalies. Not opposites. They were simply this. Brothers. It began like any other Saturday. James had come home for the weekend. Daniel had the night off. They hadn't made any grand plans, just pizza, a movie, maybe a walk. They ended up at the Lantern, a small pub near their old school. Familiar faces. Cheap drinks. A dartboard that barely worked. It felt safe. Until it wasn't. It started with a look. From across the room, a group of older guys sat clustered around a table, drinks in hand, eyes tracking James. He noticed but said nothing. Daniel noticed too. Let's finish and go, he muttered under his breath. James nodded. But before they could stand, one of the men got up. He was tall, red-faced, mid-40s, the kind of drunk that leaned into people when he talked. He walked straight up to them. You're the lads from Telly, yeah? He slurred. James kept his tone polite. That's us. The man grinned. You're the twins. What did they call you? Black and White Miracle? Daniel stiffened. James replied calmly, We're just brothers. The man tilted his head, as if studying a puzzle. Funny, innit? You too. One of you looks like you belong. The other looks like you wandered into the wrong family. James's jaw clenched. We're going to head out. He reached for his coat. But the man blocked the way. I'm just saying, he continued, swaying slightly, it's a bit of a joke, isn't it? This whole thing. You lot trying to make some big political statement, when really, it's just biology. Coincidence. Nothing special. Daniel stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't swear. He simply said, Get out of the way. The man scoffed. Easy, snowflake. Then, under his breath, but loud enough. Pair of confused little freaks. James didn't remember lunging. Only the crash of a chair. The gasp from across the room. Hands pulling, voices shouting. And Daniel, grabbing his arm, pulling him back, yelling his name. They were thrown out, of course. Told never to come back. The cold air slapped them in the face as they stood outside, hearts pounding. James paced on the pavement, fists shaking. I'm so tired of this. Daniel leaned against the wall, chest rising and falling. I know. They act like we don't belong anywhere. I know. James stopped, eyes burning. It's never going to end, is it? Daniel looked at him. And said the only truth he had, maybe not. They didn't go home right away. They walked. Down quiet streets lit by flickering lamps. Past the park where they used to ride bikes. Past the alley where James once punched a wall after someone called him a slur. Past the school where Daniel once lied about his bruises. Finally, they sat on a bench overlooking the river. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Daniel said, When I was younger, I used to wish I didn't have your skin in my blood. James turned. Daniel didn't look at him. I hated being told I was black when I looked white. Hated that people didn't believe me. Hated that I had to explain you. James said nothing. Daniel continued. But now? Now I wish I looked more like you. Why? So they'd see. So they wouldn't ask. So I wouldn't have to prove it. James's voice was soft. You don't have to prove anything. Daniel finally looked at him. I know. Because you already did. They sat in silence again. Two brothers. One bruised by fists. The other by words. Both bloodied in different ways. But neither broken. Back home, Allison was waiting. She didn't ask questions. Didn't scold. She just opened the door and pulled them into her arms. Errol stood behind her, arms crossed, his eyes filled with a quiet fury he didn't voice. "I'm glad you're safe," he said. They nodded. And that was enough. The next morning, James posted a message online. A photo of their scraped knuckles and swollen eyes. No captions. Just a hashtag. Hashtag #StillBrothers. By nightfall, it had gone viral. Thousands of comments. People sharing their own stories. Others outraged. A few, of course, full of hate. But James didn't read those. He didn't need to. Because Daniel had already replied beneath the post. Different faces. Same blood. Always. Sometimes, the world didn't need another explanation. It just needed a reminder. And that night, standing beneath street lamps and scarred by strangers' ignorance, they gave it one. Not in protest. Not in pain. But in love. For each other. For themselves. For everyone who didn't fit the box, and never would. James met Elijah at a university open mic. He had gone to read a poem, something raw and sharp about visibility, about skin, about how silence could suffocate louder than screams. Elijah went before him. He didn't read poetry. He sang. A soft, haunting voice that wrapped around the room like fog. A love song, but not the cheesy kind. It felt like memory. Like pain. Like safety. When it was over, James couldn't move. He forgot what poem he'd planned to read. He read another one instead. And when he stepped down, Elijah was waiting. "You're good," Elijah said. "You're better," James replied. They laughed. Introductions, numbers, a shared bus ride home. The next night, they talked until 3 a.m. The week after, they kissed under a flickering lamppost. It didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like exhaling. Daniel found out through a photo. James had posted it quietly, just their hands, fingers interlaced, coffee cups in the background. The caption was simple. "Peace." Daniel liked the post. Then texted. "He seems cool. Tell me everything." So James did. About Elijah's love for Nina Simone. His stubborn habit of correcting grammar in texts. The way he wore sweaters 3 sizes too big and always smelled like sandalwood and cinnamon. "He sounds good for you," Daniel said. "He is. Don't screw it up." "I'll try not to." Meanwhile, Daniel had met someone too. Her name was Zara. She was half Lebanese, half Nigerian. Studied architecture. Made her own jewelry. They met at a career fair, bonded over broken vending machines, and spent the entire next weekend walking the city and arguing about sci-fi movies. "She's smart," Daniel told James. "She challenge you? Every day. Then don't screw it up either." It wasn't long before introductions were made. They all met at a little Thai restaurant in Soho. 4 of them squeezed into a booth meant for 2. Daniel and Zara on one side, James and Elijah on the other. They talked about everything. Cultural identity, first kisses, terrible first jobs, worst high school teachers. And for once, no one stared. No one whispered. They just existed. After dinner, walking back toward the train station, Elijah took James's hand. Zara looped her arm through Daniel's. James looked over and said, "Did you ever think this would be us?" Daniel laughed. "Honestly? No. But I'm glad it is." Later that night, they sat in James's flat, shoes off, Elijah asleep on the couch. Daniel sipped tea slowly. James leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. "Do you think," James asked, "we're just really lucky?" Daniel thought. Maybe. Because most people spend their whole lives trying to find someone who sees them. "Yeah," Daniel nodded. "And we found each other the day we were born." But love brought questions. From others. And from within. When Zara's aunt saw a photo of Daniel, she asked, "Is he really mixed?" When Elijah's cousin found out James was dating a woman, he asked, "So, he's still black, right?" Questions framed as curiosity. But really, they were walls. Gatekeeping identity. Doubting truth. Demanding receipts for belonging. James and Daniel talked about it one night. "It's like people want us to prove we're allowed to love who we love," James said. Daniel nodded. "They've been trying to tell us who we are since we were 3. "Well," James smirked, were still bad at listening. Their relationships weren't perfect. There were hard conversations, late nights, fears. But what anchored them was the same thing that had anchored James and Daniel their entire lives. Truth. No pretending. No hiding. Just the quiet, stubborn insistence that love didn't need permission. Only courage. Allison met Elijah at Christmas. He brought flowers and a homemade ginger cake. She cried before dessert. Errol shook his hand and said, "Keep him safe." He meant it. Zara joined them for Easter. Helped Allison in the kitchen. Beat Daniel in a surprise chess match. Called Errol sir, until he made her stop. "You're family now," he told her. And she smiled like she'd waited her whole life to hear it. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, James and Daniel sat outside. The stars were faint. The wind cool. "So," Daniel said, "you in love?" James didn't answer for a moment. Then, "Yeah." Daniel smiled. "Me too." They sat in silence. Then James asked, "You ever wonder what life would be like if we weren't twins?" Daniel turned. "No. Because I wouldn't be me." There were still stares. Still questions. Still moments that bruised. But now they had voices to answer. Hands to hold. And a lifetime of learning to be more than the world expected. Together. They were invited back to their old school. Brookwell Secondary. The same halls where Daniel had been shoved and whispered about. The same lockers James had walked past, invisible and underestimated. But this time, they weren't students. They were speakers. Guests of honor for Diversity Week. Crazy, right? Daniel said as they pulled into the parking lot. James looked out the window, smiling. Feels like a different life. Feels like revenge. They laughed. The auditorium looked smaller than they remembered. But the students looked the same, restless, curious, skeptical. 100 pairs of teenage eyes trained on them, waiting to decide whether to care. The principal introduced them with nervous pride. "Today we have two of our own. James and Daniel Kelly. Some of you may have seen them on TV or online. But today, they're here to talk about what it means to be more than what people expect." Applause. Scattered and unsure. James stepped up first. He didn't use notes. He didn't need them. "My name's James. I'm black. I'm gay. I'm a twin. I've spent most of my life being asked to explain that, to justify it." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. But here's what I've learned. The world loves boxes. It loves easy labels. But people? People are messy, complicated, beautiful. He paused. Mess doesn't mean broken. It means real. Daniel followed. "I'm white. I'm straight. I'm also a twin." He glanced at his brother. To him. The audience chuckled. "I've been called fake, confused, privileged, oppressed. Sometimes all in the same week. People couldn't figure me out, because they wanted me to be one thing." He looked around the room. "Maybe you felt that too." Quiet. Stillness. The nods. After the assembly, students came forward. Some shyly. Some in tears. One girl said, "I'm mixed too. People always make me pick a side." Another said, "My brother's trans. No one gets us." A boy whispered, "I think I'm like you." James looked him in the eye. "Then you're not alone." Outside, Daniel and James sat on the front steps of the school. Daniel tossed a pebble into the grass. "You think we made a difference?" James watched a group of students waving from across the yard. "I think we already have." Later that week, their photo went up in the school hallway. Two young men, arms over each other's shoulders, standing in front of the same lockers that once bore graffiti. Below it a plaque read, "James and Daniel Kelly, Class of 2011. Proof that family isn't what you look like. It's who shows up when it matters." Years passed. Just moves. Arguments. Laughter. James started a nonprofit that helped queer youth of color find mentorship. Elijah designed community centers, places with no boxes on the entrance forms. Daniel opened a small workshop, teaching underprivileged teens how to build things with their hands. Zara opened a jewelry line with pieces named after bridges. They lived different lives, but always near enough to reach each other. When Allison turned 60, they threw her a surprise party. Family everywhere. Nieces, nephews, friends, cousins. Daniel gave a toast. James handed her a photo album titled Fire and Ice. Inside, pictures of them through the years. As toddlers in mismatched onesies. As awkward teens in different schools. As grown men, side by side. Same eyes. Same grin. Different skin. Later that night, Errol found them on the porch. "You two did all right," he said. James smiled. "We had help." Daniel raised a glass. "To Mum and Dad." "To us," James added. They didn't erase the pain. They didn't rewrite the past. They just carried it differently. With pride. With clarity. With love. Sometimes they'd still get questions from strangers. Still see the flicker of confusion. But now, they didn't explain. They didn't shrink. They just smiled and said, "We're brothers." Because that was enough. It had always been enough. And on the nights when the world felt too heavy, when silence curled under doors and names didn't seem to fit, they'd send each other a message. "Still me. Still you. Still us." If this story moved you, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Have you ever felt like you didn't fit in a box the world created for you? Share your story. Someone out there needs to hear it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful, real-life inspired stories about identity, family, and the strength it takes to just be yourself. Tag someone who needs to be reminded that they're not alone, no matter what they look like, who they love, or where they come from.